Prepare the way of the Lord. Make straight his path. Every mountains and hills be made low. Every valley shall be filled in. John the Baptist was preaching, and people around the villages and towns, people from Galilee, Judea, and Jerusalem, they were all gathering around John, and they were repenting over their sins and receiving baptism. And they were getting ready to receive the Messiah. John was preaching from the desert. Desert, it is important in the scriptures. The people of Israel, they spent 40 years in the desert. Jesus, after his baptism, he went to the desert and spent 40 days in the desert before he started his ministry. John the Baptist spent his life in the desert, eating wild food and wild honey. What does it mean, desert? Desert, there is no food, no water, no shelter. No food, no water, no shelter in the desert. No people live in the desert. What lives in the desert are wild animals and poisonous snakes. Then why do they go to the desert? To live in the desert is spiritually become powerful. You meet God in the desert. In the midst of all these situations, no food, no drink, no shelter, and you will meet only God. You talk to God. That is why our ancient monks, they lived in the desert, ascetic life. And Advent is a time to spend in the desert. John was preaching, every mountains and hills shall be made low. What are the mountains and hills? The mountains in our hearts will block God. If you have mountains in your heart, you cannot see God. Mountains are our ego, our selfishness, our pride that goes high and blocks God getting into our hearts. What are the valleys? Valleys shall be filled in. It is low. Should make level. Filling the valley, filling our hearts with faith in God, filling our hearts with goodness and virtues, filling our hearts with prayers, sacrifices, and this is how we fill our hearts. So, in order to welcome Christ when he comes, in order to receive Christ at the hour of our death, we should spend some time in the desert, alone, speaking to God, keeping away from all the physical activities, keeping away from all the enjoying food and drink. Keep away from these. Keep a lonely life. Spend time with God, talking to him, reading the Bible, and praying. This is the desert life. So if you want to see God, if you want to receive God in your heart, we should have a desert experience in our life. Also, we should remove all the mountains, make our heart a straight highway. No crookedness, no wickedness, always straightforward. Then God can enter into our hearts. We should fill our hearts with the goodness, virtues, sacrifices, prayers, deepening our faith, we should fill our hearts to receive Christ. And these things can be fulfilled as John was preaching repentance. Repentance is most important. If you have repentance in our hearts, then the highway is straight, the mountains are low, the valleys are filled. Repentance, acknowledge sins, confess the sins. This is what John was doing. That we can able to receive the Messiah. So next Sunday we have the penance service. It is time to prepare ourselves to have a good confession. Look into our hearts and see the mountains and the valleys in our hearts, the winding road in our hearts, the crookedness, the selfishness, the rude, the pride, and all the evil. Take it out, confess, and fill our hearts with grace. And we will be ready to receive the Christ. So, dear brothers and sisters, make use of the confession, the penance service next Sunday, a fruitful one. Prepare well. Sometimes people say, I don't need a confession. I have no sin. Self-justifying like the Pharisees and the scribes. They could not realize or recognize the Messiah. So, repentance and forgiveness of sins is very necessary if you want to see and recognize Christ. So when some people say, I don't need a confession, I have no sin. If I say that I don't need a confession and I have no sins, that means I am a saint. I am a living saint. If I am a living saint, and I should be able to do miracles here, this is what the saints are doing. They do miracles for us. If I am a saint, I could heal the sick. I could raise the dead. I could cast out demons, as the saints were doing now. So, dear brothers and sisters, we are all human beings. We are weak human beings. And because of our weaknesses, we fall into sins. And because we fall into sins, we need the mercy of God that is poured out in the confession. So I say, those who make frequent confessions, they are close to heaven. They are close to become saints. God is merciful. If you want to meet the merciful God, you will meet him in the confession. So prepare well for a good confession. God bless you.